So first up, I would like to welcome the panelists this morning. This is a fabulous outcome to be able to get this many of the people who have the responsibility for the future of our tourism industry in their hot little hands. So if I can just, in no particular order, go through and welcome them. Leanne Coddington, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Tourism and Events Queensland. Steve Cox, the relatively newly appointed CEO of Destination New South Wales. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Margy.
John Fitzgerald, Fitzy, welcome from Tasmania. Great to see you. Rodney Harricks, the Chief Executive of the South Australian Tourism Commission. Anthony Hayes, Executive Director, Industry, Aviation and Markets for Tourism Western Australia. Great to see you too, Anthony.
Morning.
Morning. Andrew Hopper, Acting Chief Executive, Department of Tourism, Sport and Culture in the Northern Territory.
Hello.
Morning, Andrew. And of course, Jonathan Kobus, Director, Visit Canberra, and many, many other things within the ACT government, which must be keeping you extremely busy, Jonathan. So thank you all for joining us this morning. Right, well, let's get into it, because I think there's lots of questions that people wanted to ask this morning about where we're going and what does it look like. And in a minute or two, I'm going to come back to the issue of everybody's individual campaigns. I wonder, there was an article this morning too in one of the papers about looking back historically at campaigns that were launched just before COVID hit and their relative continuing relevance and shelf life. However, this is a different kettle of fish. This is about re-inspiring hope in our industry. So we might actually start with the campaigning piece. And because I suppose it's a border we've been hanging out on, Leanne, can I welcome you to the panel and say, tell us a little bit about the campaign from your point of view. We're good to go.
Yeah, so we designed Good to Go so that for multiple prongs. One was that it would work to inspire Queenslanders to get out and explore the state. And also then that we knew that we could move that into the interstate market and probably into New Zealand as well. But the secondary piece to it was that it also applies to our operators. So that way for the operators to, operators telling the industry, our operators telling consumers that they're good to go, that they're COVID safe, they're ready, they're open, and they're going well. So we'll venture into the southern states, Victoria, unfortunately, encourage travellers to come here after the 10th of July. You're on mute, Margy. You're on mute.
You're on mute, Margy.
Glad somebody knows what's going on this morning. Thank you. You can tell I'm a techno, fabulous. What I was going to say is, because I can't resist it, I wanted to go to WA next, which is wander out yonder. Go, Anthony.
Indeed. Our challenge actually doesn't seem to be encouraging people to get out and about. Our challenge seems to be getting people to spend some money. And one of the challenges we're finding is the intrastate market. They're all happy to go on a holiday. Margaret River is absolutely heaving, for example, but everyone's going to their holiday house. They've all gone to Woolies. They've all stocked up on the groceries and now they're sitting on the beach. What we're trying to do is encourage people to actually support our operators and not just wander out yonder, but actually spend some money while they're out yonder and actually go and support some of these operators, because we're finding accommodation is going gangbusters. But all of those operators that survive on international and interstate visitors, we don't have them at the moment. So we're trying to convince Perthites in particular to spend a little bit of money and try something new and do something they've never done before.
Fabulous. So now, Steve, love New South Wales.
Good morning, Margy. Good morning, everybody. Look, it's a campaign all about reigniting that passion for the domestic and interstate visitor to rediscover the amazing world that we have around us. Our campaign really highlights the very best of New South Wales across all of the different regions. And I think as far as states go, New South Wales is potentially the most diverse within Australia. So the campaign sparks that desire to come and travel and revisit their own backyard, and we're seeing great results so far. And highlighting the individual level, and the campaign is at both the TV, but also very importantly, a digital campaign as well, which is seeing some tremendous results through the website and then click through to booking. So we're delighted with the response so far.
Excellent. So now Canberra, one good thing after another.
Thanks, Margy. Yeah, it's I guess the school holiday period is going to be a really important test for the industry here. The last long weekend we had a really great response, and it was good to see hotel occupancy up, and we're looking forward to the coming weeks and having people travel from, essentially we've got a bit of a captive audience within New South Wales at the moment. Borders still shut, and what's happening in Victoria, so it's a great opportunity for us to invite people from around the region, and from Sydney down to Canberra. We're engaging quite a lot with the Canberra community as well, getting the Canberrans to stay here, invite their friends and relatives to come and visit. But we're also really conscious of the need, over this next period to support our whole region. We are part of a region, and equally we are conscious of ensuring that we have people from this city travelling further afield and visiting parts that are still recovering from also the effects of the bushfires. So it's great to see the city opening up. It's great to see restrictions easing, and we are looking forward to welcome people here.
Wonderful. So I really love this one. Make yourself at home from Tourism Tas. Bitsy, tell me where this one came from. What's the response looking like?
Yeah, thanks, Margy. Listen, it's looking really good, and people are actually spending money in commercial businesses across the state. Pardon me. And the school holiday period's looking really positive. So there's lots of places are booked out for the next few weeks. Obviously, weekends are strong as opposed to midweek, but it's working really well, and it plays on the notion that Tasmanians understand the environment we live in, and it's a really beautiful and safe period for them, to be honest. I mean, they've got the island to themselves. So it's a bit of a treat for Tasmanians, because our visitors normally outnumber our population through the course of the year. The Tassie people that have the place to themselves, it's pretty cool, and we are kind of getting them to get out and about. And so the campaign, includes a whole bunch of stuff from, people are going mountain biking in Derby because they've got the place to themselves, and out to the West Coast and up to Cradle and Freycinet, of course. So it is calling on Tasmanians to get out and spend money in communities and commercial businesses, and so far it's going well. But we've obviously got to keep that going through the months ahead beyond the school holiday period. That's the challenge we're going to face.
Thank you. Now, Rodney, South Australia. And I'm particularly interested in South Australia because it's sort of almost like you were off the blocks a little bit earlier. So do you think there's going to be a transition? Is it still going to be welcome back South Australia, or are we looking at something new?
Look, Margy, one of the things that we found early on was that we had to really embrace regional communities, welcoming visitors back. And that's really what the campaign is about. It's about that community sentiment. We wanted them to embrace visitors, what it means to the regional communities. And you're absolutely right. There will be another iteration, and it's not far away. And so it will be out shortly. But what I would say, Margy, the response to this has been phenomenal. What we've seen within 3 hours drive of Adelaide has been very strong. Our challenge has been to get people a bit further beyond. So Limestone Coast, Flinders in the Outback, and the West Coast. The great thing is, with school holidays coming on, I was over on the West Coast the last few days, and first week of school holidays and the second week is also looking really solid. So it's encouraging.
This is excellent news. Now, Andrew, I've left you to last because quite clearly NT is the answer.
On you, Margy. Right on message. No, look, we're obviously in, we're sort of actually in our third phase. So we started with a piece around time to be a Territorian, and that's then moved into Never Have I Ever, which is with the voucher scheme, which we launched yesterday, which was we thought it would go well, but huge success with all of those vouchers basically registered for and gone in 9 hours, and the first 7 of those hours were the dark hours of the morning. So that gives you how much speed there was. Hello. That gives you a sense of how much speed there was, out there. Our challenge in the Territory is that while the borders are shut, we just have a really small population that's not big enough to sustain all of our operators. So the Territory's the answer is really building on that dreaming phase, and again, probably playing a little bit on some of the challenges in other places in a delicate way, particularly around this time of year with weather. So, the territory's got lots of open spaces, and certainly the drooming work we've been doing, encouraging people to think of here is now our effort is all based around 17 July and getting that conversion to happen. And there's been a release while we've all been preparing for this from Virgin, with some flights coming back on. So, air access matters in the territory. So there's some nice pieces falling into place, and there's a nice little bit of momentum there. So hopefully the operators that we're talking to, and I got the opportunity to actually get away for the weekend and be a tourist, and that operator is seeing some great results. So the Territorians are out there moving around. Now it's just how do we make the most of the rest of the high season before we start moving into that seasonal dip.
Super. Thank you very much, Andrew. Okay, so let's move on to the school holidays. So we've got July school holidays rushing at us, and with the exception of the Victorians who have our sympathy at the moment from both an industry and a larger perspective, what are we seeing as the sort of early indications on what school holidays are going to look like? And Leanne, I might come back to you again, because like it or not, that issue around the Queensland border seems to have chewed up a lot of oxygen from a media point of view. Are we seeing the rush to bookings that everybody had hoped and anticipated? And are they, where are they coming from?
Yeah, so for us, it's really interstate for this school holidays. Most people have made their decisions, so there may be some tail end as some of the school holidays lap over past the 10th of July, but it is really interstate. For the Gold Coast, for example, and Annalise would say this if she was able to join us, half of their domestic travel comes from interstate, which is why that border's been so important for them. So, yeah, so we're seeing a bit like, I think Rodney said, that 3-hour drive market around southeast Queensland is doing really strongly. The further north we go, that's where we hit trouble. Obviously, the islands are just starting to open. I think one of them opened yesterday, but in the Sundays, but Hamilton Island and Hayman aren't open yet. And then further north in Cairns, it's still, because of the high reliance on international and interstate travel, it'll take a long time for the Cairns market. Obviously, we're doing a lot of work in the aviation space, trying to work with the airlines to stimulate a quicker return to some of those routes, because the regional routes are so important for us, and we need that to get people, Queenslanders, to get to Cairns. And then the September school holidays is really where our focus is now, is how do we ensure that that really fires up for the north particularly, and obviously the south as well. But yeah, and all of the points that have been raised apply, I think, probably to all of us, but to Anthony's point, we have so much reliance on international visitation to some of our operators. Australians aren't inclined, when we go overseas, we're inclined to spend up on those sort of experiences, but it's not in our psyche when we're actually staying at home. That
absolutely
stimulating people to think about their Queensland or Australian holiday as an international experience is the challenge.
Absolutely. And listen, I am sorry, Leanne, that whoever it was who was unmuted previously who said hello darling to Andrew, I'm sorry we couldn't arrange that for you as well. So take it as a given. So look, just moving on from that, Rodney, from your perspective, what do you think the school holidays are going to look like? Because I know you had a little bit of early data on the fact that everybody's rushing out the caravan parks or the beach shack as opposed to anything more formal. Not that caravan parks aren't a formal part of the industry, but I'm just curious about what you're now seeing in terms of holiday trend.
Look, I think, as I said, I was out on the West Coast the last few days, and what was encouraging was, like talking to caravan park operators, they're actually, all their cabins booked out, unheard of in July. So I think the school holidays have actually provided, people with a bit more time. And I think also what is clear now, Margy, the messaging's coming out, like we heard it from, the Chief Medical Officer at a national level, that, this commentary around the borders being closed for longer term, the international borders. So I think that's giving people a bit of clarity that, we've got to make, the fact is the borders are closed. They're not going to be, international borders are not going to be opening anytime soon. So I think people are sort of also reconsidering. I think the other point, not just school holidays, but grey nomads. Grey nomads have actually been reluctant to travel because they want to be able to be reassured that they can get home. And what was interesting, one of the van parks in Coffin Bay, as an example, they had 48 people, grey nomads, you know, with Queensland number plates, Western Australian, New South Wales, Victorian, that had actually been long-term, sitting there waiting to move around, but unable to. So I think there's a bit of a combination. Once there's clarity around the interstate borders, I think grey nomads will hook up and get moving, but also I think school holidays provide a longer period. So we'll see those regions further afield, you know. So yeah, I think there's a couple of key opportunities there.
Thank you. So Steve, just coming to you now in terms of, you know, Leanne's point about, you know, much more focused on the September school holidays and a bit difficult because the border was a bit later opening than everybody would have hoped. Who's been the beneficiary of that? And is that the New South Wales North Coast? Are they, you know, packed to the gunnels as everybody tries to get to a beach somewhere?
Look, Margy, I think, you know, the regional areas of New South Wales, particularly the areas within that drive circle outside of Sydney, but also northern New South Wales, will do well through the school holiday period. I think the real challenge we have here is beyond school holidays. You know, a couple of weeks of visitation and full occupancy doesn't make the whole season. And, you know, there are a lot of operators out there doing it tough. And we're very, very mindful of trying to continue to drive that demand throughout. We're seeing that through Sydney as well, of course. So, you know, that whole business customer is missing. The people who would normally be visiting the large city is hurting them. So I think the school holiday period will be very strong. Anywhere outside that circle of Sydney, I think that northern New South Wales area that you alluded to will do very, very well. But it is about how do we continue to drive demand and get people out visiting beyond the school holiday periods, beyond the long weekends, that is going to be so key to the industry as a whole to keep cash flows going and keep these small operators in business.
Thank you. Bitsy, I'm just interested because a lot of what's happening, as you mentioned earlier, in Tasmania now is localised travel. When do you expect to really start seeing that bit of the surge of everybody else from other states coming back in? Because I'm assuming here that Victoria was probably one of your bigger markets, and that's now problematic.
Yeah, well, the Premier's announced the 24th of July as borders open for us. And we haven't yet moved like Queensland and South Australia have to suggest that Victorians won't be allowed in. In fact, we've set a formal review period for the end of next week to look at how Victoria's tracking, because it's a really important market to us. So the school holidays are looking really good in terms of internally in Tassie, but, you know, we're a big domestic market and we need the borders to be open to have a real crack at it. And we're already seeing pretty good demand, to be honest, post the end of July. The Spirits of Tasmania are taking bookings from sort of August, September period, and they're looking really strong. I heard this morning that you can't buy a new caravan in Australia at the moment. You have to have them built because all of the ones on the lots have been sold. People are looking to cocoon a bit and travel safely. So road tripping is going to be big. I think what we've noticed is those bookings have just plateaued as the Victorian COVID situation is now spiking. So it really is important for all of us that we support Victoria to get that situation under control, because it's a vital hub, Victoria, particularly for Tassie. But we're really seeing strong domestic demand, you know. And listen, people can go overseas this year, by the way, guys. They can come to Tasmania.
Love your work. Jonathan, just thinking about that issue of the road trip, and I suppose at the sort of more sophisticated end of the road trip for cities like Sydney and whatever else, I mean, Canberra has always been that mecca of the long weekend, etc. Is that where you see the bulk of promise coming from, or is it also a school holidays issue for you?
Yeah, I guess the school holiday period is just a really important part of just giving people the confidence to travel again, getting people out and about and feeling comfortable. You know, our traditional market is short breaks. It's that 3-hour drive market. 65% of our domestic market is Sydney and regional New South Wales. So we anticipate a good, strong response from that over the school holiday period, and hopefully from that it extends beyond and in the lead up to spring. There's been an incredible response, and we get drive-through traffic as well, people heading up to the snowy mountains and that type of thing. And there's been an amazing response to the ski fields opening with limited lift tickets available. That's all sold out. So there's going to be people moving, and the drive market through this region will be strong.
So, Andrew, coming to you once again in the Northern Territory, from your perspective, you know, how is it, just going to Jonathan's point about regions, etc., how difficult is it going to be, do you think, to encourage people farther than Darwin, and how ready are some of those other destinations going to be? I mean, in an environment where, as you and I have discussed previously, I think people who are here at home and can't go internationally are going to be looking for unique opportunities in their own domestic environment. And obviously Northern Territory has a wealth of those.
Yeah, absolutely, Margy. And I think in terms of being ready, one of the bits we're really conscious of and have to be really diligent with is a lot of the unique product is quite remote and also relates very closely to Aboriginal communities. And so we're very much in their hands around whether they would like visitors to come through or not. So we've got to work through that component and be really sensitive there and considerate. I think the great thing was, you know, Parks Australia have now moved to open up more of Kakadu for overnight camping, which is really, really critical. You know, over 50% of our domestic market, you know, is involved in some sort of vehicle movement, whether that's them driving into the state or fly drive. Really, really important to us. And like Bitsy said, you know, Victoria is a huge component of our domestic visitation. So in terms of being ready, I think we are. I think the challenge will be for many of our operators, the decision they're facing now is, do we open for a 12-week window and all the costs that are associated with that, or do we hibernate and do our best to survive through to April? And so we're working really closely with those operators to understand where they're at. I think we did a short survey which said around 80% of our operators would be open from 17 July. So that's really pleasing. Some of our initial work suggested that only about 13% of our operators were confident that they would actually recover post-COVID, and that was in April. And I think that was at a time when everyone felt that the borders would be closed domestically for a lot longer. So I think my point is that things are evolving. And certainly in some of our more regional and remote areas, they're paying really close attention on what does this mean for them. You know, only about 20% of our visitation is international, so we're not quite as exposed to that market. But certainly that fly, drive and drive market for us will be really critical. We know that there's demand and there's interest, which is fantastic. It's just now the period on which we've got to capitalise on that, and how many of those operators are willing to, I guess, take a bit of a risk. The bigger ones, your Voyagers down there in the centre, they'll certainly throw everything at it. But some of our smaller ones are being very cautious, quite rightly. But there's I think there's, in general, I would say there's a real view that there's an opportunity here to generate some good outcomes in this window of time. And I think we're certainly working towards maximising, you know, generating that demand right through into October. And the great thing for us is we are able to have events that can have, you know, audiences, albeit managed. And a lot of our event activity that we'd postponed, you know, maybe from earlier in the year was all postponed into September, October. So all of that's now coming back to life. So that'll help to drive that back end of the season, and hopefully give some of our operators a chance to bank some money and basically survive. That's really what we're talking about up here.
Thank you. Anthony, in terms of WA, I mean, such a wealth of extraordinary places to go, but, you know, when do you anticipate you're going to be able to feel the benefit from the rest of the country, looking ahead to those future school holidays, or, you know, is it really for you, at least in the medium term, going to be intrastate, so your own local?
Yeah, well, we're going to be last cab off the rank for opening up even the domestic borders. So we're well behind the pace, you know, and Qantas doing their big national sale last week, we weren't included in that. So there's some real challenges for us. So step one was to get our act together from an intrastate perspective and take advantage of the fact that West Australians can't go to Bali for quite some time. So how do we capitalise on that and get them spending some money? Step two has really been to focus on aviation. And intrastate aviation is just life and death, getting the flights back to Broome, to Exmouth, to Kununurra. And that's not an easy conversation to be having with airlines that are doing it pretty tough. And it means the state government's got to approach that in a slightly more creative way than you normally would. But we need to get those flights back, and there needs to be enough capacity that they're willing to talk to us about holiday makers rather than just people in fluoro vests who are willing to pay ridiculous amounts of money and don't care. So that's been the real focus for us, not just for the upcoming school holidays, but for the Kimberley, now's peak time. So they're doing it super tough, and if we don't get some people into that region, they've got to wait 12 months to see the next season. So that's a real focus for us right now.
Thank you. Can I just remind everybody, if you wanted to send in some questions, please do. Leanne, just while we're on the subject of regions, and I mean, you once again have custody of some of the most glorious destinations, particularly in northern Queensland. How do you drive that exercise of getting people prepared to take the extra mile if perhaps aviation isn't back up to the level we need it to, and we're really looking at the road trip? How do you manage that? What's the strategy for getting people back to those, those areas? And I appreciate, that this is every STO in the country is facing this challenge.
Yeah, and it is just that motivation. It's putting the experiences, the aspiration in front of people. We published a big book last weekend for all Queenslanders, so that went in through the newspapers out to everyone. So just, again, aspirational content, reminding people of what they have in their own backyard, what is available to try and tempt them to take that road trip. But as I said, we're also working really closely with the airlines and the airports to try and stimulate that aviation demand to get people travelling. Because what the patterns we're seeing is that people are prepared to go a short way. Different, the grey nomads were talked about. They're certainly, we're seeing lots of that travel west, but getting people to hop in their car and drive to Cairns is a challenge. So we need that aviation capacity, and we're working really hard on that. But yeah, it is about reminding people what they have in their own backyard, reminding people what others will travel all the way around the world to see. And here's a great opportunity to go and see it at a very special time as we come out of this interesting experience we've all gone through.
Interesting experience. I may treasure that as one of the best descriptions I've heard. Okay, so let's just have a look at...
Can I just make a point on that?
Sorry. Yep.
I think Leanne makes a really crucial point here, and Steve touched on it, like Amin as well. What we are seeing across the country is growth in regional tourism. If you look at sort of STR data in terms of accommodation, we're actually seeing for the first time, and I think it's probably the first time in history, that the growth that we're seeing in the visitor economy is actually coming from our regions. It's actually outstripping our cities. And I think this is going to be a challenge for us as, because people are feeling a level of comfort to go to the regions, but it's actually getting people back to our cities. We're not seeing corporate travel, and we're not seeing the travel to the cities. And so if you sort of look at occupancy levels, I would challenge, and I've looked at some of it, and it's clear that the regions are actually higher than the cities across the country. And I think, this is where we need aviation, to Leanne's point. We need to get that connectivity so that, aircraft coming into our cities, that, if a city does well, the regions will do well. And so I think this is just such a crucial point for us in terms of getting domestic aviation going.
Yeah, Margy, I have to add to that from a national perspective and a TTF perspective in particular. Getting aviation up and running again is the absolute lifeblood for our sector. And as Rodney and Leanne both pointed out, business travel is likely to be down. So all of a sudden, those flex fares that business purchases, the airlines aren't going to be seeing as much of that, and that's going to constrain their business model a little bit. So, but demand for regional Australia is there. And as an island, 89% of people fly to Tasmania. So without rebuilding that, we don't have a sustainable tourism industry. So I think collectively as a nation and as a sector, we have to urge governments at all level, to support us as much as we can to drive that enabling infrastructure, which is going to be the most important thing to help our industry become sustainable again, because more businesses are going to be vulnerable in the next 4 months than they have been in the last 4 months, unless we can stimulate that aviation to a sustainable level to enable us to drive the demand we need to have sustainable businesses.
And Margy, I'll just jump in there. I think the business travel side of things is really important. So that midweek trade, the midweek filling of seats on aeroplanes and hotel rooms, getting business happening again, and how we mobilise people to have face-to-face meetings in cities again, I think is going to be a really important part of the recovery. And understandably, there's some risk associated with that at the moment, but you know, the visitor economy is made up of many parts, and business travel is a critical part of coming back.
I agree. I think the business travel piece is the sleeper in this exercise, and given how many of our routes around the country are amongst the most heavily used and profitable in the world from an aviation perspective, it's going to take some work to get that business market back on board. Certainly what we're hearing at the moment amongst the corporate community is that for many of them, they're taking the advice of their health and safety and risk management people internally about the future of business travel and when people will and will not start travelling again for business. So I think this is a big challenge for the industry that we're going to have to do a lot of work on. Yes, please, go for it, Rodney.
I think one of the things here, like, I mean, we were talking about this at a local level, like, I mean, and, you know, as I said, I've been over on the West Coast, I flew over there, and it's about confidence in terms of what is it like going through the airport, what is it like flying, and so we're trying to think about how do we show the consumer that this is actually, you know, it's a bit different to what it was, but you can actually fly quite easily. So it's about consumer confidence in that. And look, there's no doubt price will motivate the consumer to travel. There's no doubt about that, but there's also a level of confidence in this new way of flying again almost.
We've got a really tricky one where a lot of the mining companies have shifted onto private charter flights. And we've got to get them back onto, you know, scheduled services, because if we don't get the scheduled services back, you know, the airlines won't talk to us about tourism. So step one for us is figuring out the right formula to end all of the charters that are happening all over the place, which again leads back to the conversation about safety and confidence and the companies feeling that they're comfortable to go back onto scheduled services.
Steve, I think you had something.
Yeah, Margy, I would just reiterate what everyone's saying. I think it's so important to get that aviation sector back up and running. And obviously the response to the Victorian case is going to be so important at the moment, you know, to get confidence that we can deal with spikes such as the one that's being experienced there. The international market, I don't want us to lose sight of that. I think those conversations as an industry, we need to continue to be lobbying to try to get that Trans-Tasman bubble open, and then to start to think in a sensible approach about other markets upon which we can do, and not be too spooked by the current spike. You know, I think we've got to continue to advocate for the visitor economy, and, you know, a big part of that is getting aviation back up and running. And, you know, I agree with everything the guys are saying domestically, but also keep the conversation going on some of those key international routes, because they are critically important to our industry as well.
So look, let's talk about the Trans-Tasman bubble a bit. You know, I mean, we were very optimistic, having co-chaired the Safe Border Group, that we might see it happening by July. You know, I had a very Pollyanna moment. But, you know, I mean, I think realistically, we're still going to see sort of maybe August, September, despite what we're seeing in Victoria and maybe some slip-ups in New Zealand and issues for them in terms of quarantine. I'm just curious from each of you about how much difference you think the New Zealand market may make. Is it about the numbers and the revenue, or is it just about the confidence it generates and therefore the other destinations that we might start seeing open up? I mean, Fitzy?
Yeah, listen, from our perspective, we think New Zealand's a real opportunity. We get about 20,000 Kiwis, which is not a lot compared to the sunny states in the north, but we think Tassie's actually got some experiences that the Kiwis are after. And in fact, we're working on we're sort of using the opportunity to ramp up our direct flight opportunity with the federal government at the moment. Though the government does impose considerable constraints in terms of becoming an international airport, and we aren't one currently, other than the flights we do to service Antarctica. So we're using the opportunity. We think that there is a development that can occur here that can enable direct flights from New Zealand. We're planning to campaign in New Zealand from that August-September period, regardless of a direct service, to be honest, because yeah, we definitely think the Kiwi market's an opportunity. So sort of, you know, we'd love to see the bubble operating, you know, at least in the springtime, if we can have it, and then maybe a direct flight to Tasmania, you know, at least by the summertime.
Great. Rodney, New Zealand, how much do you love them?
Look, we similar to John. Like, I mean, it's not about volume. The visitors that we have seen traditionally, we get about 60,000. They stay about a week here. They love the river, so it's quite extraordinary. Like, they have a real concentration on that experience. We've actually already started a campaign. We did that about 3 weeks ago in preparation. We've really tried to position South Australia again, similar to John's comments. We see an opportunity for that market. And I think to your point, I think it's actually a confidence thing. It sends a message, and I think that's an important one. And that's why we've always been relatively active over there, and that's why we sort of pushed on with the activity just to build that connection. We've had great discussions with Air New Zealand. They're ready to run. They're talking about September timing, and so we're out in the market with them as well.
Thank you. Leanne, I mean, it's winter. I know I say this all the time, but there is a natural inclination to head to the warmer shores.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, we're really keen to, we are working with the New Zealand market. Our challenge, it's a huge market for us. Our challenge is that we're well known. So we've got to, with all the new competition that's coming in, and we've got to make sure that we're fresh and, looking at the right segments, looking at where the New Zealanders can't go. So what have we got to offer that will really tempt them to come here? Obviously, the aviation connections are crucial as well. So, yeah, working, like the other guys have said, working on all of those things. It is a really important market. And I do think, I agree with you, I think it is about the confidence of having an international border open and having that flow. A lot of Australians go to New Zealand as well. So, it's going to open up that opportunity for New Zealand, but that's okay. I think there is that confident piece. But then it is once that border opens and we see how that goes, then it gives us more confidence to look at the next one. And, we were really excited pre-COVID for how Japan was travelling and how Korea were travelling with some new flight connections there, the opportunity that the States were going to have. But certainly those first two, the States are probably going to be a bit further away, but Japan and Korea, the way that they're handling this, perhaps there's, that opportunity sooner rather than later after New Zealand. Yeah.
Thanks, Dan. Andrew, just in terms of Northern Territory, it's quite likely after we get the bubble up and running, and, please tell us in terms of New Zealand, but post-bubble with across the Tasman, we're probably looking at a whole range of Asian ports, the ones that Leanne's just mentioned, possibly Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore as well. In other words, countries that have probably had a background with SARS and done very well at managing COVID. I mean, do you see some special advantage for the Northern Territory in that the fact that some of those early markets that will likely open are, in fact, Asian ones close to the Northern Territory?
Yeah, I think so. And just quickly on New Zealand, I agree with everyone. I think the key there is the confidence, and we see a few, certainly we do get New Zealand visitors, but not to any great extreme. But the confidence that will instill, between those countries and more broadly will be important. In terms of the Asian countries, it's really interesting. Our proximity is a great strength, but where the bit that challenges that is then our population base and servicing both directions on those flights. And that's going to be a challenge for some time. The reality is the bulk of our international visitors still feed off those big East Coast hubs. And so, we love it when everyone's doing well in other jurisdictions because it generally helps to feed us internationally. But certainly in the main, those Asian ports have traditionally been an outbound port for us, but I think there is opportunity. Certainly Japan, we've got a long affiliation with them from a visitation perspective, but again, typically fed out of Queensland or out of New South Wales. So once I think, and I think I'm meant to be really parochial and only about the Northern Territory, we're really, really keen to see everyone doing well in Australia because that means we'll be doing well internationally. And so the confidence that people have in the country matters. Typically we know that the international visitor that comes here is a multi-stop visitor, so they've got a pretty extensive itinerary. And we saw that with bushfires. When with the challenges, for example, in South Australia with bushfires, whilst the NT was relatively untouched, we were losing bookings as a result of those challenges. So that's for us over the longer term. We need to make sure that whilst things might be different, we're still we're still understanding what are our inherent challenges, which we can't change, and then therefore what opportunities that might present. I think the big thing for us, and we've got a little bit of time and we've got some interest, which is fantastic, is we have been putting before COVID and during a lot of emphasis on our product development, and making sure that we've got some really clear effort towards new product and revised or redeveloped product that really talks to some of those markets that you've mentioned, Margy, particularly in the tropics. In the north here, we've probably a little bit bereft of that, and certainly the investment in Kakadu is going to make a big difference, but that's still some years away overall. So for now, you know, the proximity helps, but we've got some inherent challenges which still makes that difficult. So I'm wishing every one of my counterparts in other jurisdictions every success, and happy to support as required, even if that's just a friendly ear to talk through any issues you might have.
Thank you, Andrew. Jonathan, from Canberra's perspective, talk to me about New Zealand and your hopes for some of these other international ones.
Yeah, I think I mean it'll be great to connect Australia to New Zealand. I think it's obvious the net flow of dollars will be more that way than this way, but it'll help us get our systems in place. It'll help us demonstrate that we can operate across borders in a safe way, and I think it'd be really good to see it happen sooner rather than later. I think we need either one of the governments just to say, look, we have our systems in place, we're good to go, and we can make it happen, and for that to be the basis for it to work from. And outside of leisure tourism, I think opening up that market will probably encourage a bit of business innovation. There'll be new ways of trading with New Zealand, so I think opportunities will extend and be broader than they were in an operating environment prior to COVID.
Thank you. Anthony, from your perspective, and then I'll go to Steve, and I'm just going to flag with you because we're almost out of time. I have a last question that I'm going to go to everybody quickly after we finish talking about New Zealand, which is basically, this has been an unprecedented sort of collegiate activity amongst everybody, and with a different emphasis from Tourism Australia. I'd be quite keen, as our last question, which has come to me from our acting chairman, Bruce Baird, what are the things you feel could and should happen from a government promotion point of view at the federal level? Is there more assistance you'd like to see? You know, just a bit of a headspace on what that collegiate behaviour might look like going forward. So, Anthony, just coming back to you in terms of New Zealand and some of these international ports.
Yeah, well, I think the conversation about New Zealand is the beginning of a broader conversation that we all need to start having now about eggs in baskets. And, you know, it'd be great if we could see New Zealand followed by Japan, followed by Singapore. That would be, you know, a good starting point. But I think it's a broader conversation about how much focus we had all put on China and how much money we were spending in one place. And, you know, of course they will come back, and of course we want them to come back. But boy, you know, a number of us were spending a lot of money in a few key markets, and maybe this is that chance to have a bit more of a philosophical conversation with TA about what does the future look like, and should we be spreading the risk or spreading the opportunity and looking for some new markets such as the Koreas and the Japans, and doing them a little bit, you know, in a more coordinated way than we have done. So all in favour of welcoming our Kiwi friends back, but that should be the beginning of a bigger conversation, I think.
Thanks, Anthony. Steve, I mean, you know, Sydney welcomes something, you know, well over a third of New Zealanders anyway as their first port of call.
Margy, New Zealand's a really important market for us. So, and I think to the point made earlier, New Zealand for us is 444,000 visitors. It's our third largest market by number of visitors. It's about our sixth largest market in total spend. So it's clearly an important market, but I think really importantly, it is a country that we can work well with to establish the protocols that are required for COVID safe international travel. And, you know, I was out at Sydney Airport yesterday doing a tour with Jeff, and, you know, the importance of the green lanes, having a safe process in place. New Zealand is a country and a market that we can work with to get those protocols established before we then look at Singapore, Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Vietnam and Thailand as probably the other countries that we would start to think about. So I think it's really important, not only from a visitor perspective, but really important for building confidence, for getting the protocols in place, and for us as an industry to continue to lobby on behalf of all of our operators that are out there, both small and large, that we need international travel to kick back in. It is crucial to our long-term success. And if we can get the model right with New Zealand, then we can take that model and apply that to other markets that, you know, as they start to roll out. So I think it's really important on many, many levels.
Terrific. So this last question now, in terms of everybody working so well together, and what we might think of is the right direction if, you know, TA is going to engage more in this space, and how you see that playing out. And I am conscious of time, so just make it a quick response. Andrew, I might start up in the Northern Territory.
Yeah, look, I think it's great that TA's engaged the way they're engaged. I think it'll just, in the short term, it's been fantastic. I guess the question is, and Anthony touched on it, what does that longer term play look like, and how do we best make the most of it? But I think the working relationship's been fantastic, and I think the way that everyone on this call has approached it with TA has been really, really good. And, you know, I can only commend Pip in their efforts, and they're in a new space too, and I don't think they desperately wanted to be in it. But I think they're doing a great job, and I can only commend everyone for their efforts to try and, you know, to work together. So I'm sure we'll get there. Very confident.
Thank you, Andrew. Fitzy?
Yeah, I guess, you know, TA have been great. They've come into the breach where they've been required, and they've sort of tried to put their energies where they can in the short term. And I think that's been welcome. We are all working well together. I think Ant's right about what does the marketplace look like. This is a logical time for us to have a good look at that at the moment, to sort of see where we think the future growth is. And it's got to be a value proposition for Australia, not a volume proposition. I think we know that right across the country. We're going to be forced into a lower volume in the short term anyway, so it gives us a great opportunity to think that through. I think the other piece, Margy, that we need to be very cognizant of and not sit here in blissful isolation is the attitude of our communities towards tourism. And once we have borders open, we still have some very nervous Australians about, once visitors start to move around the country, what that means. And I think we sort of ignore that sentiment at our peril. So I think we need to be thinking about how we encourage people to travel well, make sure they are well when they're travelling, so that, you know, we don't inadvertently be the carriers of disease into our communities, because that will really start to push back on tourism as a sector in Australia.
Absolutely. Leanne?
Just echo everything everyone said. We've really loved the partnership that we've had between all of us. I don't think we've communicated so much as we have through this period with TA and all of us collectively. So that's been fantastic. Then playing in the domestic market to open up the funnel to encourage Australians to really get out and explore has been really good. That's the place for them, and then let us fight it out as it comes down the funnel. But I do agree, the international piece, we've really got to have a good look at. We've, you know, we've very much looked at balanced portfolio. We're going light touch international at the moment, but when we go back in, we have to balance up that portfolio, to Ant's point. It's front and centre of what we're thinking is.
Thank you. Anthony?
Look, Margy, I think what this has really highlighted for me is that we need to, and TA have been absolutely awesome, but I think there's got to be a really good balance of all three source markets, intra, interstate and international, because different operators rely on different markets. And I think we've got to be really respectful of the fact that a lot of people that are doing it really tough now because they've generally sold international, we're working with them to say, right, well, how do we get you into the interstate? Or how do we, you know, you've got to rejig your product to try and broaden your source markets, because I think there's just inherent risk in what we've been doing. And I think we need to be a bit more strategic, and maybe the next lot of 10-year plans, as we start to roll them out, yeah, I think we should be mitigating the risk. We got lucky with China, as we did previously with Japan, but I think next time let's try and be a little bit more balanced in how we go about it.
Thanks, Anthony. Rodney?
Look, Margy, I think it's largely been covered. I think, you know, the opportunity is, how is the consumer different beyond this, that's looking at Australia? You know, what experiences are they looking at? How do we sort of get them a little bit further into and deeper into our country? I think that is an opportunity. They will come through our gateways, but importantly is, how do we get them beyond the gateways? And I think there's an opportunity with this to look at that and that deeper, richer experience that I think, you know, the consumer will be a little bit different. So how we use that.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Yes, I think the team's covered it well. The collaboration with Truth and Trade has been great. We're engaging more frequently, more productively than we probably ever had. So Pip and the team are doing a great job. And it's, you know, whilst we've got a captive Australian market, I think it's important that we come together and figure out ways to do that consistently and with a cohesive message to the Australian market. So it's going well.
Thank you. And Steve, last words to you, and of course being relatively fresh eyes into the market.
Look, Margy, I think, you know, the work with TA is, everyone's spoken to it, but I think it's probably just an example of what's required right now. You know, we are in a crisis. There's no doubt about that. And there is no one marketing jingo or link, you know, one marketing saying that's going to fix it. You know, one single campaign is not going to resolve it. We have to partner broadly. We have to partner as an industry. We have to partner with TA. We have to partner with the likes of Hello World and Accor and TripAdvisor, those kind of operators. We have to be driving events in New South Wales. We've got Great Southern Nights that we've pinned in November, 1,000 COVID safe gigs right across the state. So, you know, we won't get through this unless each part of our ecosystem works together and drives to get the best outcome. So, you know, yes, we're going to work with TA. We're going to lean into government. We're going to try and work across each of the platforms to get the best outcomes. It is a multifaceted recovery. There is no one simple answer, and, you know, it's going to be small steps consistently forward across each of the touch points. So, you know, I'm all for it.
Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us this morning, particularly, you know, our panelists, the STOs who are the front line of this process. And we thank you for all of the efforts you're making on behalf of the industry. And I thank all of our participants this morning. And can I ask you, wherever you are, to put your hands together to say thank you to our panel and wish them all a great day. So thank you, one and all. Take care.
And can I say thank you, Margy, for the work you're doing for the industry as well. It's very much appreciated.
Yeah, here. Well done.
Thank you. Take
Well
care.
Take
Well
care.
done.
Bye.